A group of fishermen found a metallic structure tangled in trawling nets. It was part of the fuselage of a World War II bomber. Days later, on another continent, a metal detector marked unstable ground over a box of rusted dynamite. None of these discoveries were anticipated. The war left remains in jungles, glaciers, agricultural fields, riverbanks, and urban areas. Some emerge by accident, others by climate advance or human activity. They are military structures, weaponry, vehicles, letters, insignia, and bodies. All remained outside formal records, all alter official versions. Why do certain findings continue to be catalogued as classified? What governments have tried to hide them? And how many of these discoveries can change what we believed we knew about the conflict? Bluey East 2, the abandoned base that continues contaminating Greenland. In the vast frozen expanse of Greenland, a military installation slowly decomposes, releasing contaminants in one of the planet's most pristine ecosystems. The Bluey East 2 base represents one of the most problematic environmental legacies of the world conflict. The Nazi occupation of Denmark in April 1940 left Greenland's future in uncertainty. The United States, recognizing the strategic importance of the island in North Atlantic routes, signed a defense agreement with Denmark in April 1941. This treaty authorized the construction of meteorological stations and airfields to facilitate Atlantic military operations. The selected location was Ikatek, an ice-free river plateau identified by U.S. Army Air Corps studies. The geography offered ideal conditions, relatively flat terrain for landing strips, and proximity to navigation routes crucial for European war supply. Between July 1942 and November 1943, military engineers built a completely functional installation under extreme conditions. The base included a 1,500-meter gravel runway, aircraft hangars, accommodation buildings, maintenance workshops, and vast fuel depots. Initial access depended on ships during summer, while in winter supply required dog-pulled sleds and occasional flights. Temperatures, frequently below 40 degrees below zero, presented constant challenges for personnel and equipment. Bluey East 2 served as a refueling station and meteorological control point for aircraft crossing the North Atlantic. Norseman aircraft conducted regular flights between this base and other installations like Cape Dan and Bluey West 1, maintaining a vital communications network. In 1947, with modified strategic priorities, the United States precipitously abandoned Bluey East 2. The evacuation focused solely on removing personnel and some valuable equipment. Buildings, heavy machinery, fuel depots, and thousands of barrels of leaded aviation fuel were abandoned in situ. This decision was based on terms of the 1941 agreement, which did not specify cleanup responsibilities after military use. American negotiators had secured clauses that exempted them from future responsibilities related to dismantling. Today, Bluey East 2 has become a landscape of military waste. Between 100,000 and 200,000 barrels of JP-4 fuel remain scattered, many corroded and leaking. Photographer Cyril Jasbeck, who visited the site in 2016, described these rusted containers as American flowers, visible from great distances against the Arctic landscape. The ruined buildings contain materials with asbestos, while rusted military machinery and vehicles converted to scrap metal dot the terrain. Particularly concerning are the approximately 700 boxes of unexploded dynamite near abandoned sheds, some intact, others partially deteriorated. Scientific investigations have identified multiple contaminants: petroleum hydrocarbons, asbestos, polychlorinated biphenyls, and explosive residues. Although buried barrels reduce immediate exposure, there is risk of filtration towards soil and groundwater sources. Climate change adds a critical dimension. Global warming could accelerate container deterioration and facilitate the release of contaminants previously stabilized by low temperatures. Studies at Camp Century, another American base buried in Greenlandic ice, suggest that thawing could expose dangerous materials soon. Bluey East 2 represents only a fraction of the problem. The United States built more than 30 military bases in Greenland during the war and the Cold War, many abandoned under similar conditions. This network constitutes one of the most extensive environmental legacies of the conflict. In January 2018, the Danish Parliament approved an investment of 180 million Danish crowns for cleanup of contaminated Greenlandic sites. This program includes environmental monitoring and prioritization of the most problematic sites. The remediation works executed by 60 North Greenland face enormous logistical challenges limited to summer months by extreme weather conditions. A pilot project initiated in 2019 uses drones to map the location and state of scattered barrels. This technology allows more accurate estimation of the magnitude of cleanup work and efficient planning of removal operations. With funding available until 2028, completion of a main phase of remediation and stabilization is expected. Soviet P-2, the bomber that reappeared with the crew inside. A prolonged drought in August 2015 revealed in Poland one of the most extraordinary findings of the conflict. A Soviet Petliakov P-2 bomber perfectly preserved in a riverbed, with its crew still in the cabin 70 years later. On January 12, 1945, the Red Army launched the Vistula-Oder offensive, a massive operation to definitively expel German forces from Poland. The 1st Belarusian fronts, under Zhukov, and 1st Ukrainian, commanded by Konev, advanced simultaneously with overwhelming force. The Petliakov P-2, discovered in the Bezura River, participated in this offensive as tactical air support. These aircraft, known for their versatility, fulfilled functions of tactical bombing, reconnaissance, and direct support during the Soviet advance. The P-2, also known by the Allied code Buck, represented one of the most advanced aircraft in the Soviet arsenal. Designed by Vladimir Petliakov from the VL-100 prototype, it was adapted as a tactical bomber and produced approximately 11,430 units between 1940 and 1945. This twin-engine aircraft could transport up to 1,000 kilograms of bombs, reach speeds superior to 150 kilometers per hour in improved versions, and was armed with defensive machine guns and cannons. Its metallic fuselage, double rudders, and robust wings made it particularly resistant to combat damage. The 2015 drought dramatically reduced water levels in the Bzura River, bringing them to levels not seen since the 18th century. Near the village of Kamian, divers and local volunteers observed sections of the fuselage protruding from normally submerged mud. The plane had fallen through ice during the harsh winter of January 1945. Low temperatures immediately froze the water around the aircraft, creating a preserving capsule. Subsequently, river sediments and silt covered the remains, hiding them until exceptional drought conditions revealed them. Experts from the Visegrad Museum confirmed it was an authentic P-2 through Cyrillic inscriptions found on flight instruments and control panel. The metallic fuselage, although corroded, preserved intact sections including panels, Cyrillic letters, and cabin mechanisms. Particularly notable was the preservation of radio equipment with inscriptions, navigation and control instruments, and flight stick. These elements provided clear evidence of Soviet identity and allowed precise classification as a standard production P-2. The most moving aspect was the presence of 2 crew members, still seated in flight positions. The bodies, preserved by anaerobic conditions of river mud, were found with complete personal equipment. Among recovered objects was a Tokarev TT pistol still partially loaded, parachute fragments, remains of winter military boots, and Soviet-caliber ammunition. The state of conservation provided valuable information about standard equipment of Soviet aviators in January 1945. The Visegrad firefighters directed the extraction using high-pressure hoses to remove preserving mud. The process required extreme care to avoid damaging human remains and historical aircraft components. Polish authorities immediately notified the Russian consulate, confirming Soviet origin and probable nationality of crew members. Standard diplomatic procedures allowed identification and eventual transfer of human remains for appropriate burial in Russia. Vladimir Petliakov had designed this aircraft under extraordinary circumstances. Imprisoned in a gulag when beginning the Seks-100 project, he was freed after the design's success, which Stalin authorized for parade in May 1941. The P-2 became one of the most versatile aircraft in the Soviet arsenal. Besides tactical bomber, it served as a heavy fighter in the P-3 variant night reconnaissance aircraft and ground support platform. In 1944 to 1945, it was extensively used in support of ground offensives, precisely the type of mission it was fulfilling when it crashed. The Visegrad Museum meticulously catalogued each recoverable component, from fuselage panels to navigation instruments. The pieces were transferred for subsequent studies and preservation, while human remains followed appropriate diplomatic protocols. Researchers continue analyzing Red Army records and German reports to identify the specific operational unit, precise crash date and crew names. This archival work seeks to complete the particular story of this aircraft and appropriately honor its crew members. Occupied Alderney, the Roman fortress that ended as a Nazi bunker. In the Channel Islands, archaeologists have discovered one of Europe's most complex occupation stories, a Roman fortress that served for 2,000 years to different powers, including its final transformation into a Nazi bunker. The structure known as the Nunnery began as a Roman fortress in the mid-4th century after Christ. Built as part of a coastal defensive line to protect European settlements, the original tower measured 8 meters in height with walls 3 meters thick. During the late Middle Ages and Tudor era, the fortress was rehabilitated as a fortified residence and governmental barracks. The walls were systematically repaired and internal structures were added, such as residential dependencies and defensive ramps that adapted the ancient Roman fortification to medieval military needs. At the end of the 18th century, during the Napoleonic Wars, British authorities demolished upper walls and used the space as a powder magazine and barracks. Storage annexes were built, some visible in the current archaeological site. When Germany occupied the Channel Islands between 1940 and 1945, Alderney was renamed Adolf and converted into a strategic coastal fortress. Civilian inhabitants were evacuated, leaving only 18 residents on the entire island, effectively transforming the territory into an exclusive military base. The Nazis immediately recognized the strategic value of the ancient Roman fortress. Its elevated position provided panoramic views of Longis Bay and allowed visual control of maritime routes between France and England. The existing structure offered a solid base for modern defensive modifications. Between 1941 and 1942, German engineers implemented radical modifications. They built a Type 501 bunker directly inserted between north and south walls of the Roman tower, using concrete poured on both faces to reinforce the millennial structure. The bunker construction required complete removal of the tower's original interior. The Nazis eliminated floors, internal compartmentalization, and historical architectural elements to accommodate the modern fortified shelter. This transformation represented one of the most dramatic cases of historical heritage adaptation for contemporary military purposes. The integrated bunker was carefully camouflaged in natural terrain and vegetation, hiding it from Allied aerial view. Its strategic location made it an ideal surveillance point to detect naval movements and coordinate coastal defenses against Allied invasion. The fortress transformation was directly related to the forced labor program implemented in Alderney. Between 1942 and 1944, the organization TOD employed hundreds of forced workers to build fortifications throughout the island. Alderney housed 4 camps. Norderney and Sylt functioned as concentration camps and subcamps of Neuengamme, while Helgoland and Borkum operated as labor camps. Sylt and Norderney have the historical distinction of being the only concentration camps established on British territory. The materials and labor to modify the Roman fortress came directly from these camps. The works included not only bunker construction but also coastal batteries, underground tunnels, and defensive positions distributed throughout the island. The Dig Alderney project, led by archaeologist Jason Monahan since 2010, has employed non-invasive archaeological techniques to map the complete evolution of the site. The team uses LiDAR, ground-penetrating radar, aerial photogrammetry, and selective excavations to document multiple occupation phases. This methodology has allowed generating 3-dimensional models with geographic information systems that clearly reveal chronological superimpositions: Roman foundations, medieval reforms, Napoleonic modifications, and Nazi transformations. Each historical phase is documented without compromising evidence from previous or subsequent periods. The excavations have revealed the complete structure of the Type 501 bunker, including central chamber, ventilation systems, and protected entrance. Archaeologists have documented how Nazi concrete was integrated directly with Roman masonry, creating a unique hybrid structure. The remains of Roman walls, successively reformed over centuries, have been revealed through careful excavation of defensive ramps. Fragments of light weapons, small-caliber projectiles, and possible ammunition deposits have been found in areas adjacent to the Nazi fortification. Particularly significant are findings of German military uniforms, including buckles, metal buttons, and remains of machine guns or interior supports. These elements provide direct material evidence of military occupation during 1940 to 1945. In August 2021, archaeologists finally located remains of the Roman interior courtyard, a search objective since the project's beginning. This central structure had been documented in historical sources but remained hidden under centuries of subsequent modifications. Graf Spee, the Reich's emblem that emerged from the River Plate. In the waters of the River Plate rests one of the most controversial secrets of the conflict, the remains of the Admiral Graf Spee and its imposing bronze eagle, a symbol that generated international debates about historical heritage, diplomatic responsibility, and collective memory. The Admiral Graf Spee, Deutschland-class heavy cruiser, was launched in 1936 as a demonstration of renascent German naval power. Armed with 6 280mm cannons and designed for corsair operations on the high seas, it represented the new German naval philosophy. Fast and powerful ships capable of inflicting maximum damage to enemy supply lines. Between September and December 1939, the Graf Spee conducted a devastating campaign in the South Atlantic, sinking 9 Allied merchant ships with total tonnage of approximately 50,000 tons. Its captain, Hans Langsdorff, had received strict orders to avoid civilian casualties, which paradoxically contributed to the effectiveness of his operations by minimizing resistance from merchant crews. On December 13, 1939, the Admiral Graf Spee faced a British naval formation composed of cruisers HMS Exeter, HMS Ajax, and HMS Achilles in the Battle of the River Plate. During combat, which lasted approximately 1 hour and 20 minutes, the German cruiser inflicted severe damage to the Exeter but suffered critical impacts on fuel and fire control systems. Langsdorff, evaluating the tactical situation, decided to seek refuge in the neutral port of Montevideo for urgent repairs. However, international neutrality regulations allowed only 72 hours of stay in port, insufficient time for necessary repairs and evacuation of wounded. Faced with the prospect of going to open sea where superior British naval forces awaited his appearance, Langsdorff made the decision to avoid a desperate battle that would result in massive losses of German lives. On December 17, 1939, he ordered the self-sinking of the Graf Spee in Uruguayan waters. The sinking operation was executed meticulously to prevent the ship and its technology from falling into enemy hands. The crew was completely evacuated before detonating explosive charges that opened the hull below the waterline. The Admiral Graf Spee sank in relatively shallow waters, where its superstructures remained partially visible for decades. In February 2004, a joint operation between private investors and the Uruguayan government initiated systematic rescue of wreck components. The operation was justified both for navigational safety reasons and for historical and commercial value of recoverable materials. On February 10, 2006, divers extracted the most significant element from the shipwreck, a bronze sculpture approximately 2 meters high representing an eagle with extended wings holding a swastika within a laurel crown. This piece, weighing between 350 and 400 kilograms, had been mounted on the ship's stern mirror. The sculpture was manufactured in high-quality bronze, preserving extraordinary ornamental details despite decades of immersion. The eagle's feathers remained clearly delineated, the laurel crown maintained its artistic definition, and the natural articulation of the bird's talons demonstrated mastery of German naval artisans. The eagle preserved dark paint residues in certain areas, suggesting it had originally been treated with protective coatings to resist marine corrosion. The mounting structure integrated to the hull showed how the piece had been designed as a permanent element of the Graf Spee's naval decoration. The temporary exhibition of the eagle in a Montevideo hotel in 2006 generated immediate diplomatic protest from Germany. The German government expressed concern about public exhibition of Nazi symbology without appropriate historical context, requesting that the object be removed from public view or transferred to a responsible museum institution. These objections were based on German legislation, that prohibits exhibition or commercialization of Third Reich symbols except in appropriate educational or historical contexts. The German government argued that commercial exhibition of the eagle could be interpreted as glorification of the Nazi regime. In 2019, a Uruguayan court ordered the sale of the eagle in 90 days, assigning profits between salvage investors, a decision based on maritime salvage contracts. Offers between $8 and $52 million from potential buyers interested in the historical piece were estimated. The Uruguayan government appealed the decision, and subsequently the Court of Appeals reaffirmed in 2022 that the auction should be carried out, although restrictive modalities were proposed limiting sale to educational or museum buyers. In January 2022, an Argentine bidder expressed intention to destroy the piece to prevent it from becoming a symbol for ideological groups. In June 2023, melting the eagle and reforming it as a peace dove was proposed, but President Lacalle Pou cancelled the project upon failing to achieve public consensus. To date, the eagle remains in official custody of Uruguay's Ministry of Defense, with no final sale completed. Forgotten explosives, the weapons that remain buried in the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom continues revealing buried secrets from the conflict. Fields that once served as military training areas now surprise civilian metal detectors and walkers with discoveries of unexploded weaponry, vividly reminding how war transformed even bucolic landscapes into military practice fields. In September 2021, farmer John Ross McMatuna was using a metal detector in a field in Ballymoney, near Rostrevor in County Down, when he located a 2-inch mortar of American origin. The artifact still contained approximately 2 pounds of intact explosive. The mortar was rusted but structurally complete. Standard metal tube with fuse and high explosive charge, typically composed of TNT or PTN according to standard US Army use. Despite decades of exposure to humidity and temperature variations, the explosive maintained its destructive potential. McMathuna immediately alerted regional police, who mobilized Army technical officers. These deactivation specialists conducted a controlled explosion around 10 in the morning in a specifically excavated pit, following standard safety protocols for unexploded artifacts. Rostrevor had been used as a training area by British, American, and Belgian troops, with presence of shooting ranges and light artillery exercises for pre-D-Day preparation. The mortar's location, aligned perfectly with previous reports of ammunition, remains found sporadically in the zone. A few months later, in June 2021, during a family picnic by a river in Thoresby Park, Nottinghamshire, David Hibbert found a suspicious metal object subsequently confirmed as another bomb from the conflict. Initially believing he had discovered an interesting relic, Hibbert brought the object back to his family before realizing it was military ammunition. The artifact was identified as a 2-inch mortar similar to the one found in Rostrevor, although the specific explosive charge was not quantified publicly for security reasons. The object preserved its initial design: steel tube, fuse, and possibly remains of still active naval or terrestrial explosive. Property personnel notified the explosive ordnance disposal team, which immediately cordoned off the zone. Subsequently, a controlled explosion was carried out on site through standard safety procedures, without need for massive evacuation due to the rural location of the finding. Thoresby Park had housed a military training camp used for machine gun, light mortar, and artillery practice. Findings of unexploded ordnance on its grounds are relatively frequent due to this historical activity, although most visitors are unaware of the park's military past. The military protocol for these discoveries follows an established pattern. Civilian metal detectors notify police, who mobilize Army technical officers or explosive ordnance disposal specialists. After initial evaluation to determine artifact type, corrosion state, and immediate risks, a security perimeter adapted to explosive type and its charge is established. For 50mm mortars like those found in these cases, security perimeters typically encompass between 100 and 300 meters. A pit is excavated to contain the explosion and the artifact is placed inside. Injection of initiating charge or use of detonating cord allows controlled detonation on ground, followed by crater inspection to verify no dangerous fragments remain. Many rural areas in the United Kingdom were used intensively to train British, American, and Commonwealth troops before landing in Europe. In Rostrovor, there was joint activity by the United States and United Kingdom, while in Thorsby, shooting camps and maneuvers were also mounted, inevitably leaving unexploded ammunition scattered across the terrain. These discoveries underscore how the United Kingdom was effectively transformed into a vast training field. Practically every county housed some type of military installation or exercise area, from shooting ranges to obstacle courses, and many sites preserve vestiges of that intensive activity. Authorities estimate that thousands of pieces of unexploded ammunition still remain scattered across the British countryside, a direct legacy of massive preparation for operations on the European continent. Each year, dozens of similar findings are reported, from mortars to hand grenades, keeping deactivation teams in constant activity decades after the conflict. Flight 19, the naval mission that disappeared without a trace. On December 5, 1945, less than 4 months after the end of the conflict, 5 TBM Avenger torpedo bombers took off from Naval Air Station Fort Lauderdale, Florida, at 2:10 in the afternoon for a routine navigation training mission over the Atlantic and the Bahamas. The 5 TBM Avengers transported 14 crew members in total, an experienced instructor, Lieutenant Charles C. Taylor, and 4 pilots in training with their respective gunners. The planned mission included navigation exercises, bombing practice, and coordinates toward Hens and Chickens Shoals, standard routine to maintain flight skills of naval personnel in peacetime. Between 4 and 6:20 in the afternoon, control towers received intermittent communications that revealed growing problems. Taylor reported compass failures in the lead aircraft and confusion about the flight group's position. At 6:40 in the afternoon, Taylor transmitted, "Holding course 270 degrees, we better turn around and fly east again." His last message, approximately at 7:40 in the afternoon, was, "All planes stay close together. We'll have to ditch unless we sight land. When the first plane drops to 10 gallons, we'll all go down together." After this transmission, no more communications from Flight 19 were received. A few hours later, a Martin PBM-5 Mariner rescue aircraft took off from Banana River at 7:27 at night, with a crew of 13 men, but also never returned to its base. The rescue plane vanished as completely as the 5 Avengers it had gone out to search for. The Naval History and Heritage Command describes the flight as a training exercise with navigation practice, bombing, and coordinates towards specific sandbanks. The official investigation board report concluded that compasses failed, pilots became disoriented and exhausted fuel, while the rescue mariner probably suffered an in-flight explosion. Although Taylor was originally blamed for the loss, the Navy subsequently modified its official conclusion, admitting the cause as unknown so as not to assign direct responsibility to any individual. This decision reflected the complexity of the incident and lack of definitive evidence about what had caused the simultaneous loss of 6 aircraft. One of the largest search and rescue operations in American naval history was initiated, covering more than 200,000 square miles of ocean. The operation involved dozens of ships, hundreds of aircraft, and thousands of military personnel during several days of intensive search. No significant aircraft remains, crews, or large floating debris were recovered. The disappeared PBM-5 coincided with sightings of an explosion at sea reported by an oil tanker at 9:15 at night near specific coordinates, and simultaneous loss of radar contact from a carrier escort. The 26 disappeared people included 14 crew members from the 5 TBM Avengers and 13 crew members from the PBM-5 Mariner. This figure represents one of the most significant losses of American naval personnel in a single incident during the immediate post-war period. The involved TBM Avengers represented one of the Navy's most reliable aircraft. These torpedo bombers had demonstrated their effectiveness during crucial Pacific battles, including Midway, where they contributed decisively to the defeat of the Japanese fleet. The Martin PBM-5 Mariner sent on rescue mission was equally reliable, designed specifically for search and rescue operations over ocean. Its simultaneous loss raised additional questions about weather conditions or environmental factors that could have affected multiple aircraft in the same region. Naval archives meticulously document every aspect of the search, including flight patterns, investigated coordinates, weather conditions, and testimonies from involved personnel. These records constitute one of the most complete documentations of a naval search operation of the era. The disappearance of Flight 19 occurred in waters subsequently associated with the Bermuda Triangle, although this designation did not exist in 1945. Official documents make no reference to paranormal phenomena or geographical anomalies, focusing exclusively on weather, mechanical and navigation factors. Hostile jungle, the ghost planes that no one registered. In the tropical jungles of Papua New Guinea, one of the most challenging theaters of the conflict, vestiges of aircraft lost more than 80 years ago continue emerging. The documentation and recovery work carried out by specialists like Justin Talon has revealed the magnitude of aerial losses in this remote Pacific region. Justin Talon, founder and director of Pacific Rex, has dedicated more than 2 decades to locating, documenting and preserving aircraft and ship remains from the conflict in the Pacific region. His interest arose in 1993, when at barely 16 years old he undertook his first trip to Papua New Guinea, accompanied by his grandfather, a conflict veteran, with the objective of registering still intact war sites. Since then, Talon and his team have located more than 200 remains in the jungle, collaborating directly with the Pentagon's Defense POWM, a accounting agency to establish aircraft identification and, when possible, crew identification. This formal collaboration has produced concrete results in identifying several aircraft, including the P-38J Marge, the B-17E Swamp Ghost, the B-24D Hot Garters, and multiple F-4U Corsair fighters. The locations where Talon and his team operate are generally found within mountainous zones of humid, hot climate, with elevations between 6,000 feet and 10,000 feet, 100 and 800 meters above sea level. Dense tropical jungle vegetation, combined with abrupt terrain, saturated soils, and frequent rains, presents enormous logistical challenges for any recovery operation. The P-38J Lightning, known as Marge, with serial number 42-103993, was located on May 16, 2024, by Talon's team in Madang Province. This twin-engine fighter aircraft had been originally assigned to Major Richard III Bong, although it was lost by another pilot on March 24, 1944, during a reconnaissance flight. Access to the Marge site required days of coordinated march with local guides due to the lack of established roads and dense vegetation that characterizes these mountainous regions. The plane was found on a jungle slope with the red wing visible and engines embedded in the ground, suggesting a vertical nose impact that partially buried the aircraft. Identity confirmation was achieved through documentation of the 3 digits 993 painted on the wing, visible over remains of original red paint. A radiator plate showed the label Model P-38JK, confirming both the specific aircraft type and its historical authenticity. Another notable case is the B-17E, known as Swamp Ghost, with serial number 41-2446. This 4-engine bomber from the U.S. Army Air Corps ditched in 1942 over the Agayambo Swamp and remained there for decades. Rediscovered in 1972, it was finally moved in 2006 and since 2013 has been on display at the Pacific Aviation Museum at Pearl Harbor. The B-24D, called Hot Garters, with number 42-41188, represents another liberator located in the Hansa Bay swamps. Talon and the DPAA initiated the documentary campaign in 2014, identifying bone remains along with metallic structures and registration used to confirm the unit and fate of the aircraft. Pacific Rex uses drones to capture aerial images of terrain and remains, facilitating identification of buried or partially buried structures. Topographic mapping with precision GPS allows recording with exactitude the position and orientation of fuselages, engines, and identification plates. In the case of Marge, the engines were protruding on a slope, providing key data to understand impact circumstances. Data is saved for 3-dimensional digital reconstruction, which allows analyzing structural conditions without removing material from the terrain. Serial numbers are cross-referenced with historical Army Air Corps records, assignment logbooks, loss reports, and joint flight books with the DPAA. When there are human remains, forensic and DNA analyses are performed for identification, a process managed exclusively by the DPAA according to established protocols. In May 2024, the Richard Duppenbong Veterans Historical Center of Superior, Wisconsin, officially collaborated with Pacific Rex for the mission to find Marge. The official announcement was made on May 23rd from a press conference transmitted live, where images of Talon next to the wing fragment confirming registration 993 were presented. Talon establishes links with community leaders and guides who know the terrains where remains are located. Some metallic fragments have been reused by local inhabitants for domestic use, a situation that is documented and referenced with photographic record without interfering with community practices. Legally, the government of Papua New Guinea conserves ownership of remains according to local norms. Pacific Rex requests official permits before operating and commits to documenting without removing artifacts without appropriate governmental authorization. Sites are registered through high-resolution photography of each component with metric scale, files cataloging registration, location and orientation, topographic survey with differential GPS and drone mapping to elaborate digital cartography of the impact area. Fuselages are not removed. They are maintained in situ except for specific governmental indication. Remains used by communities are registered without manipulation. Photogrammetry and three-dimensional mapping are used to make digital reconstructions and evaluate structural state without physical displacements. The finding of the P-38J Marge represents a notable advance in technical documentation and military archaeology, combining methods of aerial archaeology, documentary analysis, registration verification, and appropriate legal procedures. The gathered evidence allows reconstructing the operational history of the aircraft, its crew, and accident circumstances. Shoichi Yokoi, the last Japanese soldier. In January 1972, almost 27 years after the end of the conflict, two local fishermen in Guam made a discovery that would shock the world. A Japanese soldier who had remained hidden in the jungle since 1944, convinced that the war continued. Shoichi Yokoi was born on March 31, 1915, in Sayori, Aichi Prefecture, Japan. Before his military service, he worked as a tailor, a skill that would prove crucial for his subsequent survival. He entered the Imperial Japanese Army in 1941 as a private and was soon mobilized, initially serving in the 29th Infantry Division in Manchukuo. In 1943, he was transferred to the 38th Regiment and stationed in the Mariana Islands, where he landed in February 1943 as part of Japanese defensive preparations in the Pacific. His unit was preparing for combat in Guam when American forces launched the operation to retake the island in July 1944. During the Second Battle of Guam, which culminated in August 1944 with American victory, Yokoi was part of a unit in charge of ground defense. Upon conclusion of official combat, Yokoi, along with other soldiers from his unit, made the decision to retreat into the jungle rather than face capture and the perceived dishonor of surrender. Initially, Yokoi survived in groups with up to 9 companions who had made the same decision to avoid capture. During the first years, these small groups maintained sporadic contact and shared resources for survival. However, most died gradually from starvation, disease, or were captured by American patrols. In 1964, Yokoi found his 2 last companions dead in the cave they shared, apparently victims of malnutrition and disease. From that moment until 1972, he remained completely alone in the jungle, convinced that Japan continued fighting in the World War. For 28 years, Yokoi employed various strategies to survive in extreme conditions. He inhabited a cave near the Talafofo Falls, subsequently known as Yokoi's Cave. He built a structure lined with mud and roots to protect himself from weather and store food safely. He made clothing using plant fibers, tree bark, and reused plastic materials, sewn artisanally with needles manufactured in the field. One of his most elaborate suits was constructed with jute sacks, recovered plastic buttons, and cuts of plant material treated to resist the jungle's constant humidity. His diet included tropical fruits like mangoes, papayas, and various types of nuts. He complemented these plant sources with proteins obtained from crabs, snails, frogs, mice, and shrimp captured in nearby streams. He developed sophisticated techniques for nighttime fishing and construction of traps for eels and crustaceans. He maintained rusty metal containers to store potable water and preserve food. In his shelter were subsequently found 2 hand grenades and a 155mm artillery projectile, although his personal weapons were completely unusable after decades of exposure to tropical humidity. On the afternoon of January 24, 1972, 2 inhabitants of Talofofo village, Jesus M. Duenas and Manuel D. Garcia, were checking shrimp traps in the Talofofo River when they found Yokoi. The initial encounter was tense. Yokoi, distrustful and alarmed, attempted to attack the fishermen before being peacefully subdued. The locals brought him to a boat and fed him hot soup, after which he was turned over to Guam authorities. According to doctors at Guam Memorial Hospital, Yokoi was in relatively good health, although slightly anemic due to lack of salt in his diet for decades. Guam authorities immediately coordinated with the Japanese government for Yokoi's return. The Japanese embassy on the island interviewed him extensively, confirming his identity, military rank, and origin in Aichi Prefecture. With the transfer approved, he was repatriated in February 1972, receiving state funds to cover travel expenses. Upon his arrival in Japan, he was hospitalized for 83 days in a Tokyo hospital. During this period, complete medical evaluations and psychological orientation were conducted to help him adapt to modern life, which had changed dramatically during his absence of almost 3 decades. His return was received with massive media attention, public parades, and a meeting with approximately 5,000 people. He pronounced the phrase that became popular throughout Japan: "It is with much shame that I return," expressing the traditional military mentality he had maintained during his isolation. In November 1972, he married Mihoko Hatashin, 13 years younger than him, and settled in a rural area of Nagoya. He continued as a public lecturer, appeared in documentaries like Yokoi and His 28 Years of Secret Life on Guam from 1977, and received an official pension from the Japanese government. In 1991, he had an audience with Emperor Akihito, official recognition of his service and suffering. He died on September 22, 1997, at 82 years old from a heart attack. He was buried in Nagoya with appropriate military honors. The site where Yokoi lived was designated as Yokoi's Cave, located next to the Talofofo Falls. Although the original structure was destroyed by a typhoon, in 1980 it was added to the Guam National Register of Historic Places. Currently, there exists a replica accessible to the public that illustrates the survival conditions that Yokoi developed during his isolation. Messages from the front, the letters and dog tags that returned decades later. Personal objects from soldiers continue emerging unexpectedly, connecting the present with individual stories of service, separation, and sacrifice. These fortuitous discoveries reveal the human dimension of the global conflict through intimate elements that transcend military statistics. On December 6, 1945, Sergeant John Gonsalves, 22 years old, sent a letter from Bad Orb, Germany, where he was stationed after the official end of the conflict. The missive was addressed to his mother, Angelina, who resided in Woburn, Massachusetts. In its 2 pages, the letter included comments about his health status, descriptions of German rainy and cold weather, and qualifications of military food as quite bad most of the time. The letter mentioned his sister Agnes and requested family news, while indicating he did not expect to receive packages from his mother before returning home in January or February 1946. It was written on standard military correspondence paper and sealed with a 6-cent stamp for airmail from Germany. In 2021, 76 years after its sending, the letter was rediscovered in the Pittsburgh Postal Processing Center, where it had remained in a container without movement. An employee of the U.S. Postal Service identified the correspondence as historical material and initiated an internal investigation to determine living relatives using death records and current postal addresses. The tracking process revealed that both Sergeant Gonsalves and his mother had died decades before. Gonsalves had successfully returned to the United States, had married Angelina Jean, and had lived 61 more years before dying in 2015. The letter was finally delivered to his widow on December 9, 2021, with official notice and explanatory note from the USPS highlighting its historical importance. The second case involves a military dog tag found in March 2021 by a woman walking through the wooded area of Fontainebleau, France. The tag bore the engraved name Pete Pihos and corresponded to the standard U.S. Army design, although without additional visible information like serial number or blood type. The discoverer contacted the Pro Football Hall of Fame after researching the name and discovering that Pete Pihos was a distinguished member of that institution. The Hall of Fame investigated military records and confirmed that Pete Louis Pihos had fought under General Patton in Europe and participated in the liberation of Fontainebleau in August 1944. The verification process included cross-referencing dates, military locations, and Pihos's service history. The institution acted as intermediary between the French discoverer and Melissa Pihos, the soldier's daughter and assistant professor at Valdosta State University. Melissa provided additional documentation, official service photographs, complete military records, baptism certificate, and documented testimonies from her father about losing his dog tag during combat in France. This multiple evidence allowed conclusive association between the found object and its original owner. The dog tag was sent by certified mail from France to Georgia, United States, with complete delivery record to the family in March 2021. The Pro Football Hall of Fame generated a file that includes photograph of the dog tag, letter signed by the discoverer, complete history of Pete Pihos in military service, and documentation of the tracking process for identification. Both cases present a similar mechanism of institutional intervention, recognition of the historical artifact, authenticity verification through official records, family tracking using civil and military databases, and formal delivery with certificates and appropriate documentation. The verification process in both cases used official military records, cross-referencing dates and names, and confirmation of geographical locations. Gonsalves's letter was authenticated through date, place of origin, appropriate stamp, and 1945 military correspondence style. Pihos's dog tag was verified through service records, combat location, and documented family testimonies. The U.S. Postal Service located Gonsalves's relatives through searches in death records and current postal addresses, applying standard regulations for undelivered historical military correspondence. The Pro Football Hall of Fame mediated between the French discoverer and Pihos's family, providing institutional authentication and facilitating the international return process. The letter is preserved along with the explanatory note and USPS internal record catalogued as undelivered military correspondence from 1945 forwarded in 2021. Official scans of the complete pages exist, including handwritten text, postal seal, and military letterhead published by specialized media. Pihos's dog tag was documented through high-resolution photography, correspondence with the French discoverer, institutional verification certificate from the Hall of Fame, international shipping and reception record, and coverage in local media specialized in military history. These cases illustrate how personal objects can remain lost for decades before reappearing through fortuitous circumstances. They also demonstrate the effectiveness of specialized institutions to verify authenticity, track relatives, and facilitate the return of historical materials to their appropriate contexts. Crowland, the amphibious tank that awakened after 70 years. In May 2021, a team of local volunteers in Crowland, Lincolnshire, completed the excavation of one of the most unusual findings of the conflict on British territory, a completely preserved LVT-4 Buffalo amphibious tank buried for 74 years in the mud of the English Fenlands. The vehicle corresponds to a Buffalo LVT-4, variant of the landing vehicle tracked known as Water Buffalo. This amphibious armored vehicle was designed specifically to transport troops and supplies in amphibious operations, representing a crucial technological innovation for landings on hostile coasts. The technical specifications of the LVT-4 include a length of approximately 8 meters, capacity to transport up to 2,900 kilograms of cargo or 24 equipped troops. It could develop close to 32 kilometers per hour on land and 10 kilometers per hour in water, with autonomy of approximately 240 terrestrial kilometers or 120 aquatic kilometers. The LVT-4 was distinguished by its rear ramp design, allowing direct disembarkation of personnel or cargo upon contact with shore. This characteristic made it an ideal platform for operations requiring rapid transitions between aquatic navigation and terrestrial mobility. Initially conceived as a maritime-to-coast transport vehicle, the LVT evolved to perform tactical functions. In 1943, the British Army disposed of approximately 200 LVT-1s for training prior to D-Day. The LVT-2 and LVT-4 variants, called Buffalo, were widely used in Europe. During the Battle of the Rhine in March 1945, known as Operation Plunder, at least 600 Buffaloes were mobilized to cross troops and vehicles, supported by armed versions or equipped with specialized systems for muddy terrain. They also participated in crossings of the Elbe and Po rivers, supplied by depots of the 79th Armored Division. After the end of the conflict, at least 16 Buffalo LVT vehicles were transported to Crowland, Lincolnshire, for flood defence work on the River Welland. In April 1947, 5 of these LVTs were swept away by waters during severe flooding and remained sunk in muddy deposits after water withdrawal. The muddy structure formed by clay and peat originated a natural tomb up to 9 meters deep, where these amphibious vehicles remained hidden until their rediscovery in 2021. The anaerobic environment created by soil conditions prevented severe corrosion and preserved significant structural components. Daniel Abbott, leader of the Crowland Buffalo LVT Association, had dedicated 3 years to locating possible buried vehicles through historical maps and records of the 1947 floods. After obtaining local authorization to excavate on agricultural terrain, the team employed backhoes, structural supports, and muddy wall containment to avoid collapses during extraction. The vehicle excavation took 5 consecutive days, culminating successfully on April 29, 2021, with the revelation of a 9-meter, 18-ton vehicle. The cabin was intact, and the machine gun mount was preserved in surprisingly good conditions due to protection provided by anaerobic clay and peat. The natural sealing of the LVT's exterior maintained metallic surfaces protected from serious oxidation. The presence of intact mechanical platforms and armor joining points was documented, elements that facilitated subsequent mechanical restoration plans. Once unearthed, the vehicle was transported to the barn of the landowner farmer in Crowland, where it was sheltered in a dry area while the final destination was defined. On June 9, 2022, according to permit from the South Holland District Council, an urban license was requested to build a museum at Kenulph's Farm near Crowland. The plan includes exhibiting the Buffalo LVT as part of commemorating the 75th anniversary of the 1947 floods. The group plans to conduct light mechanical restoration so it is operational in May 2025, coinciding with the 85th anniversary of European victory, and raise funds to rescue other vehicles buried in the same terrain. The LVT-4 was a significant improvement introduced in August 1943, with engine relocation and wide rear ramp that substantially improved troop and equipment disembarkation. A total of 18,616 units were manufactured, of which 3,000 were destined for amphibious, terrestrial, and fluvial work in Europe and the Pacific. Nigerian forces, the British Army, Canadian troops, and the Soviet Army received units under the Lend-Lease clause to cross rivers like the Rhine, Elbe, and Oder. The Buffalo's versatility made it an indispensable tool for operations combining river navigation and terrestrial mobility. The restoration plan contemplates mechanical inspection of the engine to determine the state of pistons, residual fuel, and drivetrain armor. It also includes structural review of torsional suspension elements and armor, functional reintegration through transmission system installation for controlled movement, and anti-corrosive stabilization with inhibitor coatings. The objective is to deliver an operational vehicle for commemorative event in May 2025, maintaining historical authenticity while guaranteeing safe functionality for public demonstrations. This project represents one of the most ambitious restoration efforts of conflict amphibious vehicles in the United Kingdom.